So let's look at categorical data first. So the grades for a paper in Professor Dumbledore's class are A, B, C, B, C, D, F, A, C, 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 D, B. So notice that I could have put the grades in as percentages, and in that case, that would be numerical data. But because these are not done as numerical data, this is not considered quantitative, this is categorical. We're putting them into letter categories, A's, B's, C's, D's, F's. So we can actually present this, we can create what's called a frequency table and a relative frequency table for this data. So we'll talk about how to find that relative frequency. So for example, let's look at the grade. So the different categories we have are A, B, C, D, and F. And I always put at the bottom here a total amount, total running amount, so I know how many people were total. Okay, so how many A's were there? We've got 1, 2, 3, 4 A's. How many B's? 1, 2, 3 B's. How many C's? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. How many D's? 1, 2. And that leaves just the 1 F. Now notice as I went through and organized this data into a frequency table, I circled which ones I counted. And that's because it's really easy to miss one. So I always recommend as you're adding in and counting that data set to either cross it out or circle it or do some type of mark to show you've already counted it. So in total, there were 4 plus 3, which is 7, plus 6, plus 2, plus 1. So there was a total of 16 students that had graded papers. All right. So now let's say this is great and this really helps us organize the data. As a teacher, this would help me see, all right, so out of 16, so 7 people got A's and B's. Only 3 people got a D or an F. So these are things that you want to kind of look at for organizing your data and using your data to make some changes in your class if needed. So the other thing too is sometimes we want to know the percentage of A's or the proportion of A's. So in that case, that's called a relative frequency. So to figure out that relative frequency, it's the frequency divided by the total. So this is the frequency of the category data divided by the total. And that gives you that relative frequency. So the proportion would be 4 over 16, which is 25%. So 25% of the students got A's. B's. So there's the relative frequency. The frequency of B's was 3 out of the total, which is 16. So that's about 18.75%. Now, if you're wondering where I'm getting these percentages from, if you go into your calculator and you take 3 divided by 16, you're going to get 0.1875. To change that into a percentage, we would move that decimal spot over 2 to the right, and that's what gives that 18.75%. For the frequency, relative frequency for C's, there were 6 C's out of 16 total papers, which is about 37.5%. Again, if you took 6 divided by 16, you can do this in Desmos or in a calculator, or even in Excel or Google Sheets by typing equals 6 divided by 16. You're going to get 0.375. So changing that to a percentage, again, move that decimal over 2 to the right, gives 37.5%. The relative frequencies for D's are 2 out of 16, which is about 12.5%. And then for F's, 1 out of 16, which is 6.25%. So when I add up all these percentages, I better get 100% because that would mean I'm including all of them. And when I add them all up, I do get 100%. If I was looking at the proportions and adding up those fractions, it would be 4 plus 3 plus 6 plus 2 plus 1, which is 16 over 16, which is also 100%. So a frequency table is great because it organizes and gives totals in each category for the data. Now, if we wanted to see something visual, we could create a bar graph or a pie chart. So these give really good visual representations. I'm going to show you guys how to do these too. So a bar graph is a graph that displays a bar for each category and with the height of the bar indicating the frequency of each category. So for example here, if I created a bar graph out of the Dumbledore's letter grades for papers, we had A's happened 4 times, B's happened 3 times. So you can see we had each of the categories have its own bar. Those are done below and we've labeled what those are. And then the frequency that they occur, so the amount of times they occur, is how high your bar is. So C's occurred 5 times, D's occurred 1 time. Actually, it should be a little bit different. But yeah, you get the gist. So now if we were looking at a pie chart, so I could do this also with a pie chart. So what the pie chart does is it uses the relative frequency and it puts them into different areas of the circle. So 21% is in red, so B's. 21% got B's, 29% got A's, 7% got F's, and you can see that labeled. So it gives kind of a good area of where everything fell into place. So I am assuming actually these were probably not created by Dumbledore since they're a little different. So these are just examples of how you can take some regular data that's categorical. You can create a bar chart by making different categories. Each owns bar and the height of it is how many times it occurs. Or you can take that relative frequency that you found, that percentage, and create a pie chart. So let's look at this. The following table is a sample of 500 homes in Oregon that were asked what the primary source of heating is in their home. What percentage of households heat their home with natural gas? So in this case, what we've been presented with is a relative frequency table. So this will help us figure out, okay, so what's the percentage of households that heat their home with natural gas? So I can easily see, okay, the people that heat their home with natural gas, that's 50%. Now, if I wanted to take that a step further and figure out how many households heat their home with firewood, so now I'm not looking at a percentage, I'm looking at how many. So 8% heat their house with firewood. Now this question is asking for how many, so not the percent, but how many of them do. So that would be 8% of the sample, which is 500 people. So converting that into math terms, that's 0.08 times 500, which equals 40 households. So having these types of frequency tables and relative frequency tables are really helpful in us being able to extrapolate the data from a study. Another thing, like we talked about, is we can look at a pie chart. So Corey categorized his spending for the month into 4 categories: rent, food, fun, and other. So something that's a cool tip for you to know is that a lot of times your banks will end up in credit cards sometimes. If you go and look in those accounts, they actually will analyze the data for you and they'll give you something like this so you can see how much of your money you're spending each month in specific categories. When I did that and it said how much I was spending in Amazon, I made some big changes. So the percentage he spent in each category are pictured here. If he spent a total of $2,600 this month, how much did he spend on rent? Okay, so he spent 26% of the money he spent went to rent. So 26% of $2,600 went to rent. So if I converted that and wrote that as a mathematical statement, 0.26 times 2,600 ends up giving $676 that went to rent. And again, this is just a really good way to kind of look at where am I spending my money? I'm spending 16% on fun. Maybe I need to start cutting that back a little bit so I can put more money into food because maybe I'm having some food insecurities.